Okay, as always, we appreciate that you're taking time out of your schedule to join us for HAI at Work. We appreciate the fact that you've been joining our webinars, and we think that you'll enjoy today's topic on the standardization roadmap for UAS operations. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. As always, we'll start with Jim Viola, the President and CEO of HAI. We have Chris Martino, one of our moderators today, who is Vice President of Operations for HAI. We have Jim McCabe, the Senior Director and for Standards Facilitation with the American National Standards Institute. And we have Arthur Hinaman, the Manager of Technical Programs in the Office of UAS Integration at the FAA. As always, we will encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. Please use the module that's in the toolkit that's part of the GoToWebinar control panel on probably the right side of your screen. Type your question in, and we will hold all questions until the end of the webinar. We will do our best to answer as many of the questions as we can before we do run out of time. There will be a video link that's available tomorrow. Usually the video is either emailed directly to you from GoToWebinar, or you can access it on the HAI website. Just do a search for webinars and you should be able to find it right away, as well as all of our old past webinars as well. I'd now like to introduce Jim Viola, the HAI President and CEO, to provide his introduction.
Great. Thanks, Dan, for that. Today's webinar covers very timely and appropriate topics. It's standards, and of course, standards apply across the board and are very important in the aviation world and part of everyday life. They're essential to manufacturers, especially. So as we talk about the expectation of the consumers, and then the expectation of how do we have standards that ensure safety. You know, who wants a life jacket that won't keep you afloat, or a fire extinguisher that's labeled fire extinguisher that won't put out a fire? So the actual performance levels are quite often ensured through the establishment of standards. So this is absolutely true for the aviation community. Not only do we have performance standards for equipment and systems, but we also have standards for things like crew performance, maintenance practices, and also training to standard. So standards keep us safe, plain and simple. And I think everybody on this call is aware of that. Right now we have approximately 93 people on the call, so I certainly appreciate y'all tuning in. And we find ourselves at a unique time in aviation with this new category of aircraft as it's making its way into the national airspace system. It's a form of an unmanned aircraft, or even as the larger aircraft, the optionally piloted aircraft. Because they are new, there's still a lot of work that needs to be put in order for the safe integration. And integration certainly is the key word from segmenting, which was some of the thoughts early on. So the development of standards is a critical part of that work. And now is the right time to make sure that we get it right. So you heard some of the introductions today and some of the abbreviations that are out there, but now what you hear about is ANSI's, which is the American National Standard Institute, and the UAS, the Unmanned Aerial Systems Standardization Collaboration, has taken on the workload to identify the full scope of standards necessary to assist with the safe integration of UAS into the airspace. So we're fortunate today to have these executive leaders for the UASSC, and I know they are happy to share the information with you today. It's our goal to have you walk away from today's webinar with a better understanding of the processes and the players and the work that's going on behind the scenes to help that we have standards in place to support this industry, and more importantly, to ensure the safety of all the stakeholders operating in and around the NAS. So thank you very much, and with that, let's get over to Jim.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim Viola. That was a great introduction. Thanks to HAI, glad to be here. And as Jim said, I'm going to talk to you, or the three of us will be talking to you today about some work that ANSI has done via its Unmanned Aircraft Systems Standardization Collaborative. Jim gave a terrific introduction to standards and the importance of them, so let me just sort of amplify what he said. Okay, before I do that, just what we're going to cover. We're going to look at the benefits of industry standards and how they support the policy framework and ultimately the safe integration of UAS into the airspace. I'll talk a little bit about ANSI's role as a coordinator and specifically about the standardization roadmap that we've developed. And then we'll wrap it up with how you can, if you're not already, get involved in influencing the development of industry standards for UAS. Let's see. So in addition to myself, Jim McCabe, I guess we want to have, oops, went too far. We want to have Arthur Hinaman and Chris Martino, who you probably know, introduce themselves. So Art.
Okay, there, I've got it. So good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I'm Art Hinaman with the FAA. I've worked with many of you throughout my career in aviation, and I guess my only regret is that we can't be doing this face to face. Hopefully we'll get to those days once again soon. Thank you. Chris?
All right. Thanks, Art. I think most of you know me. I'm Chris Martino, the Vice President for Operations here at HAI, but I'm also honored to be the industry co-chair for the collaborative that we're talking about today, the Standards Collaborative. So within the scope of HAI, obviously we are all things rotorcraft, both manned and unmanned, and sometimes optionally piloted. So again, it's an honor to be able to represent the rotorcraft industry in such an important initiative as this collaborative is. So thanks for being with us, and I think you'll be very impressed with the work that industry has completed here. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Okay, thanks, Chris and Art. So this might be a little hard to read, but Jim talked a lot about performance standards and their importance. So just to sort of amplify some of the points, you know, some folks think of standards as stifling innovation. At ANSI, we like to think them as actually enhancing innovation and driving business growth. Standards are key to interoperability, whether you're talking about processes, products, systems. You got to have standards in order for things to work together. It can help you lower your R&D costs by avoiding non-value added costs. Certainly quality is a huge factor in promoting efficiency throughout the supply chain. All these things help get your products out to market faster, protecting health and safety. Certainly safety is paramount when we're talking about a complex airspace that has helicopters, drones, conventional aircraft flying. And sort of tied to that is standards can help if you're in a situation where you have to do a legal defense. So it can help you with defending yourself from protecting yourself in terms of liability and demonstrating regulatory compliance. So this is sort of like on the conformance or conformity assessment side. ANSI's CEO likes to say standards are just good ideas unless there's compliance with them. So demonstrating that the products perform to standards is key to their adoption. And ultimately, this is really about creating public trust in the market and fostering widespread acceptance. So when you have sort of not necessarily a new, but an emerging technology area like drones, UAS, standards are going to play a key role. Okay, I'm not sure what's going on with the slides, but they seem to have lost a little of the content. But anyway, so ANSI's, we're just over 100 years old. We were founded in 1918. We're a nonprofit membership organization, and we basically serve as the umbrella organization that coordinates the U.S. private sector system of standardization. It's private sector led, public sector supported. And we, as a membership organization, we have roughly we represent the interests of roughly 270,000 companies and organizations in the U.S. largely, but also around the world. I think it's on the order of 30 million professionals worldwide. And in terms of International outreach, one of the things we do is we serve as the sole U.S. National standards body to the two Geneva-based international standardizing organizations, those being the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, and through our U.S. National Committee, the International Electrotechnical Commission, or IEC, as the name suggests, works in the electrotechnical area. ANSI does a whole lot of things. On the domestic standards side, you probably heard of ANSI standards. Those are standards that have been submitted by accredited standards developing organizations for approval as American national standards. As I said, we represent U.S. interests and serve as a way for U.S. stakeholders to get their views into ISO and IEC in terms of the development of actual standards. On the conformity assessment side, we serve as an accreditor of certification bodies, whether that's for products, personnel certification systems, and so on. And we're a third-party clearinghouse in terms of a standards reseller. We ourselves don't develop standards. That's a key thing. We're a standards organization, but not a standards developing organization. And as such, we help to get standards out into the marketplace. What I'm going to talk about today is kind of in our role as, there we go, that looks better, thanks, Dan, is going to talk about our role as sort of a coordinating body. So I'll move on to the next one here, hopefully. Right, so among the many different purposes of ANSI, again, serving as the national coordinating institution for standards and conformity assessment or compliance is maybe an easier way to think about it. Determining the need for new standards and conformity assessment programs where necessary. This we do by promoting existing organizations that are competent to resolve the particular need and working to establish groups where they don't already exist. Significantly also, it's about cooperating with all levels of government, whether it's federal, state, or local, to achieve as much as possible optimal compatibility between government laws and regulations and the voluntary standards of industry and commerce. So how do we do that? We call these things ANSI standardization collaboratives. And basically what it is a cross-sector coordinating body that works to identify and ensure the compatibility of standards and conformance programs, particularly, again, in areas of emerging technologies and national global priorities. We've done these in other areas such as additive manufacturing, electric vehicles, deployment, energy efficiency in the built environment, homeland security, nanotechnology. So today we're going to talk about what we've been doing in the unmanned aircraft system space. Ultimately, this is about coordinating public and private sector. Whether you're talking about manufacturers, suppliers, operators, pilots, users, you name it, everybody is welcome to the table. So what we do is we identify existing standards, guidance that's already out there, as well as standards that are currently in development. We look at that and then we do a gap analysis. We define where there are existing gaps based on stakeholder needs. And we recommend additional work. Sometimes it's just basically a developer already has a project on its way, and it's about recommending that it be completed, finding out or identifying timelines for when things can be completed, and organizations that can perform the work. Each of the standards developing organizations that we deal with, whether they are a professional society or a trade association, typically they determine their own work programs as driven by their members. But what an activity like this does is kind of bring everybody together in one place when there are a lot of different players involved and sort of hash things out to make sure the left hand knows what the right is doing. Everybody is sort of working in lockstep as much as possible. So it's ultimately about helping to inform resource allocation in terms of participating in standards development or even research and development activities, avoiding duplication of effort. about helping to drive coordinated standards activities. So the hope is, you know, as end users of this roadmap, the SDO community in particular, although there are many audiences for what we've done, they will take up the charge and go forward and act upon the recommendations that we've identified. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Art Hinaman. He'll give you a little more background on the how we sort of got to where we are now. Art?
Okay, thanks, Jim. So once again, it's good to be with you all today. So why roadmap? With the pace and magnitude that UAS are taking to the skies, it's unprecedented. And with that flurry of activity, there was a lot of standards development activity going on. A lot of different organizations building a lot of different standards. So we decided to put together a roadmap to help coordinate the effort, to prioritize the efforts, and to reduce the duplication. There's plenty of work to be done. We didn't need a lot of people trying to do the same thing. Let's see if I can take control here. All right, it worked. I think we went too far though. There we go. So to build the roadmap, we put together the collaborative. And again, I have to thank Jim McCabe and the ANSI for leading the effort and hosting the collaborative. Also, great thanks to HAI for stepping in, and Chris Martino, particularly being the co-chair along with us in the FAA in the collaborative to work through this effort. So the collaborative, you know, in addition to the coordination, the prioritization, the reducing duplication, you know, one of the main things we're looking for is to accelerate the standards development. Again, as mentioned, this is a fast-paced industry, and their traditional, you know, several years worth of rulemaking followed by several years worth of standards development till you finally have something in place. We can't afford to wait 4, 5, 6 years for things to be in place. This industry happens in weeks and months. It can't wait for years, and I didn't do that. Maybe somebody's telling me I'm taking too long. There we go. So the collaborative is made up of government, both federal, state, local government, industry, the associations like HAI, AUVSI also participated. From the industry have operators, maintainers, manufacturers, and we also had academia involved in this thing. So we had a wide selection, as it says on here, over 400 individuals from 250 different organizations. So it's a good cross-section of folks, and all of us had the one thing in common: we were looking for safe integration. So in the end, we put together a roadmap. Actually, we put together 2 roadmaps. The roadmap captures the intent, was to capture our requirements, look at what has been developed, what's in development, and then find the gaps for what needs to be developed yet. I think we've done a pretty good job of that. The first version came out December of 2018, and we've been using that to help us prioritize our efforts. My branch within the FAA, we focus on standards development for UAS. So it's really helped us with the multitude of activities that are developing standards to help coordinate that effort. And then we realize, you know, it's fast-paced, things change rapidly. So we put together the team, got the band back together, and worked through, and we just published the version 2 in the end of June 2020, which covered, you know, what's been new, what has been completed since version 1, and some of the new stuff that's emerged. It's amazing how fast things happen in this. And as you can see down at the bottom of the page there, the roadmap is available for free. Go to the ANSI site /UASSE, and you can download the roadmap and see what's in there. Okay, I hope I'm not stuck. Okay, there we go. Went one too far. So this slide, I'm going to save you. I'm not going to read every one of these and discuss every high priority gap. But the point of this is that we have prioritized. There are quite a few high priority. There's several more who haven't met that. Some of the highlights are design and construction. We need standards for design and construction. Detect and avoid and beyond visual line of sight are some of the biggest things holding us back from being fully integrated. Remote identification between us and our security partners, that's very important to get that out, and operations over people. And we're looking to have our rules out on remote ID and ops over people by the end of the year. We're on track to have that happen, even though there's a lot of work to be done. It's important to say, we mentioned that this is a collaborative and there's a lot of different people involved, the government, industry, academia. So these priorities aren't the FAA's priorities. These are the industry's priorities. We in the FAA, we need standards to support rulemaking. The industry also needs standards just to help keep the industry on a level playing field and to progress UAS operations. So how do we do it? Why is this a good thing for the FAA? Essentially, with this industry consensus, it's pretty much a mandate that we use industry consensus standards wherever we can. The SDOs, the standards, and the industry applicants all are involved in that process. The FAA, we stay involved in it, so when the standard is developed, that it's something that we can support. The applicants use the standard to show compliance with the regulation. The FAA, we use those same standards to find compliance within their application, and we're able to allow the operation. It's a good process. It works well, and it only works by having the right people involved and getting the right experts in the room to make sure that we have good standards. And I think on that note, I will pass it over to Chris.
Okay. All right, looks like I have control now. So thanks, Art, I appreciate it. All right, so based on what you've heard so far, the scope and the breadth of the collaborative was far-reaching. There's no doubt about that. It basically crossed over all aspects of what our industry does. There's standards associated with nearly everything that we do, as Jim talked about in his introduction. But yeah, we're talking about the integration of new aircraft into the national airspace, and as you can well imagine, the topics that needed to be addressed by industry covered nearly everything we could think of, and everything probably you can think of. So it made sense that there would be some type of division of labor associated with the collaborative, and it was necessary in order to get the work done. And that division came in the form of specialized working groups. In the early stages of this discussions, it was very interesting because it centered on how the collaborative would be organized. I mean, there was a great deal of discussion on the organization. As a result of those discussions, very early on, 4 primary topic areas were addressed by the group. And those were credentialing, airworthiness, operations and procedures, and airspace and infrastructure. Again, 4 very important categorical buckets, if you will, that were developed. To address each of these topic areas, the groups adopted what was called a working group structure. And 4 working groups were established in order to address them. And those working groups met almost continuously. I mean, on a weekly basis, we had folks meeting in order to get the work done. Again, there were 4 work groups. Working group number 1 was based on airworthiness standards. Working group number 2 was put together in order to address flight operation standards, and those flight operation standards had to do with general concerns and general personnel qualifications. Flight operations standards, so working group 3, again, and they were looking at infrastructure inspections, environmental applications, commercial, workplace safety, things like that, which we'll get into in just a second here. And then Working Group 4 was also flight operations standards, but they were given another kind of direction, if you will. They were looking at public safety operations. So the slide that you're looking at right here is Working Group 1. And it covered everything, you know, airworthiness wise. It covered everything related to the aircraft systems. Again, include everything, including the controller to the aircraft linkage. I'm not going to read all of these things to you, but from the list you can get a very solid appreciation for what Working Group Team 1 members were working on. So not only did it cover what you would expect it would, like propulsion systems or electrical systems, designs, construction, things like that, but it also focused on things such as navigation capabilities, communication systems, detect and avoid systems, flight data monitoring, and they even looked at parachutes. So they covered pretty much all aspects of the hardware, if you will, associated with the system. A very broad scope, obviously, from what you can see. Let's see if that works. Hang on, trying to advance the slide here. There we go. So Working Group 2, again, they were assigned to look at flight operations standards in terms of general concerns as well as personal qualifications, like we talked about a little bit earlier. And this covered all aspects of the flight planning, of the operational concerns, plus personal training, qualifications, certifications, and all those things. Take a look at the list here. Again, I'm not going to read it to you, but when you take a look at it, you get the gist of it. A lot of the things that they were looking at pretty much align with what you would expect to see, you know, expectations for standards for manned aviation. But again, when you look at it, you also see that there's some very unique aspects of what they were tasked with looking at. And that required the group to think in different directions at times, in terms of standards, if you will. Typically, maybe in the ways that the aviation industry has not looked in the past. So again, very interesting times in aviation. Working Group 2 had their hand full with pretty much everything across both the manned side and the unmanned side. So it made it very interesting. Okay, Working Group 3, I'm not sure. Okay, there we go. They were also assigned to look at flight operation standards, but their approach was just a little bit different. They were asked to look within the scope of an application-specific focus, and their focus was infrastructure inspections, environmental applications, commercial services, workplace safety, things like that. Use cases and what standards would be necessary for those use cases. So whereas Working Group 2 was taking a look at the more traditional flight operation standards, you can see the Working Group 3 was reaching out into standards associated with the actual use of the aircraft in specific day-to-day operations. Again, not going to read it to you. It's a good list. But I will point out that the operations that the Working Group 3 folks were looking at, many of those that you take a look at, and they were the first uses of these aircraft. Inspections, patrolling, monitoring. All of these are being done as we speak, and all those operations have been in place probably for the last couple, 3-4 years. I mean, there are unmanned systems doing those missions right now. So in some cases, if you think about it, we're probably playing a little bit of catch up regarding standards within those areas. But that said, the working group was also taking a look at some of the newer areas that the unmanned systems will be working. Areas such as passenger transport and cargo transport, things that haven't really fully developed yet and perhaps aren't fully implemented across the national airspace. And finally, we had work group 4, certainly not least of all, because again, a very big scope of what they were looking at. They were also taking a look at operational standards, flight op standards, but again, similar to working group 3, they were looking at standards in terms of operational use cases. But their particular focus had to do with public safety use cases, which covered specific operations, concerns, things like that, typically associated with our public services aircraft operations. And operations such as, like, for example, search and rescue or bio or hazmat responses, law enforcement investigations, disaster response, or any other mission that you can think of, which would include the use of an unmanned system to provide public safety benefit. And from that list, you can also see it included a look at some of the capabilities typically associated with public services, including, for example, the electro-optic infrared requirements that are often used in those types of operations. So the big picture is one of which, you know, even when you take a look at it, we had a breakdown. We broke it down into 4 working groups, but each of those working groups had very full plates to deal with. There were lots of topics, but what we're glad to say is Art talked about a little bit, and as Jim talked a little about, you know, we had a remarkable outpouring of volunteers from both industry and from government to work on this. And it was because of that overall response from government and industry that the initial development of the roadmap and the subsequent revision too were made possible. If it wasn't for the outpouring of, I mean, truly experts in the field, you know, the roadmap probably would have taken much longer to produce. If you haven't seen the roadmap, I strongly recommend you do take a look at it. It's very complete, it's very comprehensive, and it certainly is indicative of the expertise and the experience and the hard work of the volunteers that were you know, good enough to lend their time to it. So again, we look forward to your questions, and with that, I think the last slide is Jim. I'll hand it back over to Jim McCabe. McCabe, thanks a lot, Jim. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So I just want to take a moment here to talk about, if you're not already involved, and I know that was our poll question, how you can get involved. So obviously one of the ways is participating in the UASSC, particularly if you feel your level of expertise or level of availability interest is more in just sort of identifying the need and contributing you know, at that level in terms of your sharing your knowledge. We're on a little bit of a hiatus right now because, as Art said, we just published version 2 at the end of June, but we do anticipate sort of kicking back into gear later on. So you can simply send us your contact information to uassc@ansi.org, and we'll make sure you're on the mailing list. Again, a significant thing is we, the UASSC, we're not developing standards. We're just sort of doing the road mapping. If you want to get involved in actually rolling up your sleeves and participating as a subject matter expert, what you want to do is you want to contact one of the SDOs directly to participate on a standards writing committee. Now, you can use the roadmap kind of as a guide as to which SDOs and which committees cover the different topics. In addition to the gap analysis section, which talks about, it's chapters 6 through 10 of the document, which talks about the specific topics that Chris just listed and why they're important and which standards have been published. At the very front of the document in chapter 4, we have sort of in their own words overviews of the principal standards developing organizations and what their scope of work covers. So we try to present the information in a couple of different ways to make it useful. In addition to that, ANSI itself on Fridays publishes a weekly publication called Standards Action. And this is an opportunity, you can sign up for this for free. It'll tell you which standards are being proposed and which are open for public review. Now, the only catch is it's not limited to UAS. So you're going to have to do a little bit of searching. It covers everything, but whether it's a new activity from ISO or a new standard published by ASTM or SAE, you'll see it in there. If it's something being submitted for approval as an ISO standard, once it reaches the draft international standards phase, or as an ANSI standard, if it's being submitted for public review, it'll be listed in there too, and you can send your comments directly to the SDO that is responsible for the standard. So different levels of engagement depending upon your level of interest. I just echo what Chris and Art said about taking an opportunity to download the roadmap at ansi.org/UASSC, seeing what it has that is of interest to you. I believe the next slide is simply contact information. So you have mine, my associates, and you can contact us at any point. And I guess, Dan, then I'll kick it back to you for Q&A. Can't hear you, Dan.
Okay, I do apologize. There we go. I do apologize for the technical issues. I don't know where the slides disappeared to, but I'm glad we were able to bring them back up. I do invite our panelists to turn your cameras back on, and we will start addressing the questions. The first one, I know that we have at least 15 countries represented in our registration list today, so I know that this one will be of interest. How are the FAA and the Unmanned Aircraft System Standards Collaboration Group working to encourage international harmonization with civil aviation authorities around the world? I'm not sure who wants to try and take that one.
All right, you want to go first since the FAA part?
I think, yeah, I think that's got my name written all over it. So we take that seriously, even though this is a U.S. effort. Obviously, unmanned aircraft is a global concern. So we've got within the UAS integration office, we have AUS 200, which is our international programs office, and their work with the FAA's international programs office. So, a lot of outreach going on there, a lot of collaboration and harmonization. We participate in the ICAO, the RPAS panel. We also participate in JARS, the working groups there. We've led a couple of the working groups within JARS. So I'd say between JARS, ICAO, and then whenever anything's going on, our international office does a lot of outreach and communication harmonization.
Okay.
Well, can I jump in? I mean, just to build on what Art said from the UASSC side. So process-wise, I mean, because of our focus was on integration in the U.S. airspace and its unique challenges, we did say that participants had to have operations in the U.S., but that didn't stop us from tapping our colleagues overseas. And many of the folks who participate wear multiple hats. Leadership hats. I mean, Art mentioned the involvement in ICAO. There's JARS. We had at the front of the document, and part of our process involved doing a public review section where we sent out the document when it was in draft form for 30-day review, and we got a lot of comments back from international folks as a result of that. Activities like AW drones, which is funded by the European Commission. We had direct involvement by EuroK in Europe. Groups like GUTMA, even NATO submitted a contribution. So we think I guess to sort of pat ourselves on the back, I know that the AW drones folks in Europe indicated when they started their initiative that the first version of the ANSI UASSC was very helpful to their efforts. So we'll be interested likewise to see what they come up with. But I just wanted to add those additional points.
Yeah, and I'll add one more if I can, Dan. If you take a look at the list of subject matter experts that volunteered their time to this effort, many of those organizations, those industry organizations, operate internationally. So it was very much in their benefit to keep in mind what it is that we're doing for this particular collaborative, because those things could be later on harmonized across other nations. So again, I think just because it's ANSI at the pointy end of it, ANSI carries a great deal of weight, I think, across the world, and the industry folks that were on the working groups, they have international ties. So I think it all blends together very nicely. It worked very well.
Okay, appreciate that. Art, I think this next one is going to be for you as well. Question from Brandon. Why wasn't the already established FAA Part 27 rules used for UAVs?
I won't say we threw out anything. We looked at everything that was available. If a rule was in place that you know, a manned rule that fit for unmanned, we'll use it as is. A lot of the when we do certification, you know, a certification basis, we will take the existing things out. You know, if it's a rotorcraft that we're trying to get certified, we'll take rotorcraft certification basis, apply as much of that as we possibly can. Obviously, we start throwing out things like seat and manuals being in the cockpit, but we use that, and you know, we can use it as is. You know, just apply it towards an unmanned aircraft, or as we're working on this design and construction and some of this other stuff, we adapt it as best we can. So we'll have rules tailored to unmanned aircraft, but everything's on the table. Hopefully that answered the question.
Okay, let's see. The next one's a bit longer. From Larry Grandy. I'm a former EMS helicopter pilot who has had drone mid-air collision concerns since drones started flying. We often operate in uncontrolled airspace without access to drone operating routes or schedules, etc. Do commercial drones have some type of avoidance technology from other aircraft, and how does that operate? Tail rotors and main rotors are fragile, not to mention the rest of the helicopter.
So I can start that off, and I'm sure the regulatory side Art can touch on. But you know, within the scope of the industry, you know, that is probably one of the primary drivers, one of the most important things that we are concerned of, you know, with and are looking at in the development of capability, is that comes down to the detect and avoid capabilities that aircraft will need to have. Again, to be able to operate beyond visual line of sight, or to be able to operate autonomously, you know, the expectation is these aircraft will abide by one of the very basic rules of being able to operate in the national airspace, which is being able to avoid other aircraft. So that's a great question, but I think the basic answer is that it's still under development. It's being developed very quickly. And we wholly expect that industry will come up with solution sets and capabilities that will allow these aircraft to operate with remarkable see and avoid, sense and avoid, detect and avoid capabilities. So it's coming. It's coming.
Okay.
Here's where I'd like to chime in,
Please.
if I may. So I'm a helicopter pilot and I own a Piper Cub. So I'm an advocate in the FAA for those folks that do fly down low. And a lot of folks say, you know, nobody should be below 500 feet anyhow. Well, there are a lot of us that are legitimately down there, and for a reason. So with that, everything Chris says is absolutely right. We really got to work on this detect and avoid technology. The unmanned traffic management system, UTM, coming out there will help. One of the big pushes that we're trying to go, you may have seen there's a request for information circulating around there about how can we leverage the unmanned aircraft remote ID in manned aircraft to help. Essentially, you know, as a manned aircraft operator, it's tough to see these tiny little things out there. But if you're squidding ADS-B out, if you're somehow we're able to participate with remote ID with that vehicle-to-vehicle communications, where it's not as big a deal that you see them, they're going to see you electronically, and they're going to stay out of your way. So even until the radars get down to the size, weight, and expense that we can put them on every little flying unmanned aircraft, the more that you can be seen, again, ADS-B out. And if somehow we can come up with a remote ID module that could go on a manned aircraft to help you be seen by the unmanned, then the unmanned are going to stay out of your way.
Okay. Our next question is from Anthony. There has been a lot of talk and a notice of proposed rulemaking to address airworthiness standards under 21.17 Bravo, but not much on 21.50 continued airworthiness. Is there something working?
I can't think of anything. I'm not gonna lie to you. I can't think of anything on the continued airworthiness. The first part is what I was talking about, using the part 27, whatever it is that you're most similar to help you get through the process.
Okay. What are the next steps for the Unmanned Aircraft System Standards collaboration?
Well, I guess I'll try that one first. So one of the things that, is important is, and now that we've identified all these gaps, is to see what pickup there is on them. And again, a lot of them are stuff that's already being worked on. So we're just kind of cataloging who's already working on a particular issue to do, providing sort of clarity for the standards landscape. But going forward, what we want to do is set up a mechanism by which we, at least semi-annually, kind of provide maybe like an appendix to the roadmap that talks about the current status of work, whether new standards have been published, new projects have been initiated, maybe new working groups have been set up. So we want to do that. We've talked about, like a year out or so, maybe the fall of 2021, thinking about a version 3. It might be slightly scaled back in terms of its ambitions. I don't know if it'll be a 400-page document like version 2 is, but again, the whole idea would be to kind of track and monitor what the SDOs are doing and what the progress is to get these standards written. And of course, just promoting the work that's already been done and getting people's attention, trying to encourage standards participation. The SDOs, I think I can say fairly, they're always looking for subject matter expert volunteers, folks who, because of their professional occupation, have a level of expertise that they can bring to the subject matter and raise those safety, quality, interoperability, performance kind of concerns to make better standards.
And I'll add to that just a little bit from the industry's perspective. HAI again represents the rotorcraft industry, both manned and unmanned. But within the scope of the development of these aircraft and their implementation and their injection, if you will, into the national airspace, we as the operators, we as the users of these aircraft are going to discover down the line that, hey, maybe we didn't think about this. 2 years ago we worked on it as part of the collaborative, but that technology is now 2 years old, and we have this new technology that will actually do this. So I think what you'll find is that it's not necessarily going to be a living document, but it certainly will be a document that will when it's updated, we'll have things where where we had a gap 2 years ago, but those gaps are filled because the development organizations for standards, they filled them. They found that there was a need for it. They created the standard and they published them. I think we as industry are going to find new gaps as we continue down this road, implementing this new technology. And it's going to be hardware related, it's going to be software related, but I think one of the key pieces to it is the fact that industry will want to be one of the leading voices to identify where these gaps are. And then we'll be able to work through the associations, through HAI, through the folks that are engaged in it, to get it back into the collaborative so that we can actually have folks that develop standards start working on it. So industry's got a huge piece in it. And I don't want to speak for Art, but I suspect the FAA will rely heavily on that. Because again, they a lot of the things that the performance-based regulations that the FAA is dealing with right now are based on industry accepted standards.
Okay, Chris and Jim, you both addressed the work that's already been done. How did you determine the priorities in setting up the UASSC and the work you're doing?
I'll take a stab, and then if Chris wants to jump in. So we sort of used a model, we adapted it, I think, from a military. We called it CASE. And so the first aspect was criticality. So basically what we did, and we deliberately came up with this sort of format because we didn't want the priorities to be like subjective. So we looked at safety and quality.
For some reason, but how did she spell the version?
So we looked at safety and quality. We looked at achievability. like the time to complete. Is a project already started? Is it a brand new project? We looked at the scope, and from that we were looking at things like R&D, like how much R&D is going to be needed to get this kind of a project off the ground. And then sort of we looked at the effect or the business return, if you will, by having a standard. You know, how is that going to benefit the industry? So we just had a scoring system. People rated each of those criteria on a scale of 1 to 3. We totaled the score, and so we came up with high, medium, and low. High priority meant we had to have a standard in the next 2 years. Medium, we said 2 to 5, and low, 5 or more. But I mean, again, as Art said, this is a really fast-moving industry and technology. We tried to, after we did version 1, we had realized that the priorities we had identified, we came up with 40 to 60 were high priority. So we tried to segment those a little more. So that's where you saw on the Art slide where it talked about the tier 1. So that's sort of the top of the top. Then we have, you know, those are the most critical, then critical, and then less critical. It's all important. And a lot of these subjects interact, but, you know, they all have to, ultimately, they all have to be addressed in order to have the safe integration.
So I don't know if I can add anything of substantial value to that, because that answer is right on. But I will add that when you take the priorities that existed, the next big step was to make sure that the 4 working groups had adequate subject matter experts. So there was a little bit of jockeying back and forth between, in fact, we had some work groups or some individuals that were actually active on more than one working group. Because when a subject came up and required particular subject matter expertise, at times there was some shuffling of personnel back and forth. But what Jim described, I mean, that was the how do you set it up? The other part was how do you execute it? And again, you know, I'm very happy to say we had so many wonderful, absolutely amazing subject matter experts that came out to assist. It actually made that portion of the program a lot easier, because we had plenty of talent to choose from. And if a topic popped up that nobody expected, we were able to find somebody to address it. So that worked out very nicely.
Well, with all the subject matter experts and all the discussions you've had going on, this might be kind of a foolish question, but how is the FAA using this roadmap to help with rulemaking?
So we use this this is my go-to as we prioritize our efforts. So we have ID and ops for people. We expect to have the NPRMs are out there. We expect to have final rules calendar year in December. With that, they're going to rely on industry consensus standards. So the rule isn't worth a lot if you don't have the standards to back it up. You know, there's ASTM standards to go along with them. A lot of SDOs are doing a lot of good things. ASTM happens to have the just released one on remote identification that will answer the mail for the most part and be able to get people operational. It'll need tailored once the rule comes out and we see what the final rule says, but it's going to be good enough to get started. Same thing with operations over people. We're looking at trying to get away from kinetic energy, you know, whatever kinetic energy an aircraft carries, but what is the injury that it part if it hit one. We also have, you know, not just performance, but test methods for all these. So we try to map together, these are the rule makings that we have going on, or these are existing rules, and we actually need some standards that kind of help define, you know, this existing rule was written for manned aircraft, but if we can come up with a good standard that we can adopt, it can bridge that gap between the fact that this was written for manned aircraft and here are the nuances of how it could apply to an unmanned aircraft. And it saves us a lot of rulemaking if we can put that in a standard and we can adopt that standard, as long as it doesn't conflict. If it can give that additional guidance that we need, then it really helps.
Okay, well, we are about ready to run out of time. So let me ask each one of you just real quickly, is there anything that you would like to leave our viewers with before we wrap up the webinar today?
Well, from my perspective, just thanks certainly to HAI for letting us participate. Again, it's an open process, so you're welcome to participate, whether it's in the ANSI UAS SC. The SDOs are also open, so you can participate as much as your interest level and resources allow. So get involved if you can. It's important.
And my parting words are in line with that. It's, as industry, the folks that the standards hit on the most or affect the most, impact the most, are industry. I mean, the standards are designed to help us do what we do. And if the standards aren't aligned with the way we're doing business, then we probably need to step up and bring that attention to the folks that are developing the standards. So it is very much in our interest as industry, as the rotorcraft industry, to make sure that we are engaged in the standards development process. None of the standard development organizations want to produce bad standards that nobody can comply with. So it really helps if industry is engaged, and we let them know what we can do and how we can do it, and based on that, it's a relationship that is very beneficial to business.
Okay,
But
gentlemen.
I would just like to
Go ahead.
if I could, thank the members, the HAI members. As I said, I've worked with a lot of you. Thank you for what you're doing out there, fighting wildfires, moving people, moving equipment, all the great things that you do. I'm envious as I'm in an office and you're out there turning fuel into noise. I'd love to be with you. And with that, please use that expertise. Get involved in the SDO activity, in the standards developing activity, and as we work on the next phase of the roadmap over the next year or so, expect there'll be some work going on there, and please get involved in these working groups. It's UAS are here to stay. That's people can fight it. I think we're past that. Now it's how do we safely integrate, because we're not going to get that. They're just moving too fast. There's too much momentum there for anybody to stop. So please work with us to help make it as safe as possible for everybody involved. And again, thanks for what you do.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you for your time, your assistance this afternoon. I do invite you to go ahead and close your cameras, and we'll wrap up a little bit of the last minute housekeeping. We do have a follow-up questionnaire coming to everybody very shortly. We do ask that you spend just a few minutes to let us know what you thought of the webinar today. Also, if you have any suggestions for future topics, we do follow the suggestions very closely. Speaking of which, next week's webinar is one that has been requested by our viewers, by you. Long line operations. It's an interesting niche within the industry. Requires a very interesting skill set. We'll be talking to a long line operator course instructor who has got a great deal of experience, Andre Hutchings with Volo Mission. Look forward to hearing with him, and he's going to bring along a couple of other pilots who are flying long lines as well. That'll be next Thursday, August 20th, same time, 1600 Eastern Time, -6 UTC. Watch for the link in social media, in your email as well. As always, we'd like to know how HAI is doing. If you have any suggestions on how we can do things better, what we might need to be doing more of, what we're doing better, well with already, please let us know that as well. Best way to do that is through our email address, president@rotor.org. That email goes directly to Jim Viola, and he passes it around to the appropriate staff members. As always, we invite you to fly safe, to stay safe, and we'll see you next week.